This is House Planning Help episode 284. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. And coming up, not one, but two guests today. We've got Calum Taylor, the owner of Build It magazine, and also Opinder Liddar, a director of LAPD Architects. And they're here together to discuss Build It magazine's education house. This is something they've actually gone out and built at Graven Hill, and we'll dig into the details of that in a moment. It makes sense, though, since we've got them here. And I think our resource this week has to be Build It magazine. It's been around for some time, so not only has it got the practical information that you need for a self-build project that's going to take you through the inspirational articles as well, examples too, and answering questions, everything that you'd expect from a magazine. And then, as I mentioned, on top of that, I think that we have to include this sometimes when people ask about what's good research to do. Number one on my list anyway is to get out there and see some finished houses or get onto a construction site if you can. And so this is a great opportunity. Graven Hill's a very interesting place to go and have a look, full stop. But then you've got the education house there as well. So we'll definitely tag this onto our list of very useful things to go and do. And I think they've laid it out in such a good way that you can do your little tour around the house and learn a fair bit as well. So let's get to the interview with Calum and Opinder. And first of all, I asked them to introduce themselves.
Yeah, hi. Well, I'm Calum Taylor, and I'm the owner of Build It magazine, which is, as you may be aware, the longest running self-build magazine in the UK. And what we try and do as a magazine is just be as practical and as down to earth as possible to really help self-builders make the difficult decisions and to make those as easy as possible. So we saw building this house as a natural extension of that, but everything we are doing as a magazine, be it the magazine, the website, the exhibitions, is all about helping self-builders with expert advice and information to help them make the right decisions to create a wonderful home.
And I'm Opinder Liddar. I'm a director of LAPD Architects. So we're locally based in Oxfordshire. We've got 15 architects within the practice. We specialise in residential projects and in particular the self-builders. So we're doing a number of projects, including this one at Graven Hill as well.
Where does this story begin then? Obviously, you were celebrating a birthday at Build It. Graven Hill had kicked off. What is the first point of thinking we're going to build a house?
Well, I was very interested in the original idea for Graven Hill, because one of the fundamental blocks for self-builders is the ability to find a plot of land. Now, Graven Hill is, or has developed into something of the poster child for government of what could be the route forward with that. And as background on that, the MOD used to have the site. Cherwell District Council has bought the site from the MOD and has got planning permission for 1,800 new homes, up to half of which will be self-build plots. So there's never been self-build on this scale before in the UK. But there are cynics. There are people saying, oh, but it's not like a normal self-build plot, it's a smaller plot, it's more like a developer-sized plot and things like that. But I think it's incredibly important that for self-build to really become the norm in the UK, as opposed to what is done by a relatively few, relatively wealthy people, that we need to look at different models, and we need to look at how you can have fantastic housing on smaller plots of land. And if you can do that with the profit on the land going back into the local community via the council, then that strikes me as being a perfect model. And that's exactly what Graven Hill are doing. It's owned by Cherwell District Council, and they're doing it to make money, to put it back into local services. So I was very keen to be involved as a magazine, and in the early stages they were talking about getting a number of the bigger companies to do show homes, a bit like you'd get in Germany, where people can just go along and say, I'd like one of those. And I just came up with the idea of, wouldn't it be good to actually not present one company's product, but bring together a whole host of interesting companies to work together to create an educational show house that members of the public could come to, whether they wanted to build on Graven Hill or not, and they could actually come round and learn about the process of self-build, learn about the decisions that we had made, and go away better informed about how attainable that journey would be for them and how they could actually move forward.
So were you in at the beginning as well, Opinder?
I've been an expert for Calum's magazine and his events for a number of years, so we've always been chatting about what's happening, and because Graven Hill is on our doorstep, asking Calum about what's happening here, what's going on over there. And we've seen projects happening and hearing about it, but Calum then came to us and said, there's an opportunity, I'd like to have a go at designing a house for Build It over on this plot. What do you think? And we started from there, I think.
And had you done other developments on Graven Hill before then, or was this coming first? If you can remember.
We were approached by one of the Grand Designs couples at the outset when they were going through qualifications. We did design a house for them, but they didn't get selected in that initial round. It turns out, I think one of the couples, the original 10, dropped out, and then they came back in, but they had to rush through, so they went for a standard off-the-shelf solution in the end. But other than that, this then, I think, was probably the second one.
But you didn't have Kevin MacLeod following you around on this one, because just to explain that this is round the back of Grand Designs, the street where that was. So presumably that's why this was one of the sites, because this was an area where they would be particularly proud of, or did you get to choose it like the other Graven Hill self-builders would?
They allocated a number of plots that could be used for show homes of one sort or another, and there was a tender process to be involved with it. And I was a little bit selfish in that I identified this as being a fantastic corner plot and said, if we're going to do something special here, this is the plot I want it to be on. So I put in our tender on that basis.
So it is a good plot.
It's still a site. Every site is different. So how do you draw up the constraints and the opportunities of this particular site?
The fact that everything is different is great. I think this is how self-build should happen and how housing should happen, because you bring your own individuality to what you want on your plot. So every plot comes with something called a plot passport. So it defines certain parameters about a maximum height and a build footprint of where your house needs to be. There's other little definitions where you can have single-storey elements, etc. But generally it defines where the house needs to be, what its overall height has to be. And then you start to respond to the site aspects. So we've got a nice outlook over towards two sides that we've got here, and it's making the most of those opportunities. And then we obviously had a briefing exercise with Calum and his team about what they'd like to achieve, and then the initial design then starts to come together. It will evolve. You're not just given, here we go, here's a number 42 from our catalogue. It is specific for this site.
Now, this is something that I'm particularly interested in, and that is that you've got this 30 years of the magazine. Everyone's going to be looking at you. So what is going to go on the brief?
To be 100% honest, the 30-year thing was a little bit of a coincidence. But we really wanted to be the first magazine in the UK that actually built a house for editorial purposes. And that for Chris Bates, the editor of Build It magazine, to be hands-on involved with the project management of a self-build was a fantastic editorial opportunity. It's interesting from a brief perspective because I have done a number of self-builds or major renovations myself, remodelings and things like that. And I had a fairly clear idea of what I thought we should be doing here. We went through the briefing process with Opinder and then started considering the plot constraints and the advantages of whatever. And Opinder came back with something that was quite different to what I'd, in my formulaic way, expected, but very nearly worked very, very well. And there were very few tweaks from that point to us coming up with the final design, which is something I just totally love and isn't something exactly how I'd have designed it myself Even
That's
having
why
been
you
through
need
it
an
before.
architect. Yeah.
But it's tricky because are you designing this to be a house one day? Are you focusing on the fact that you're going to have a lot of footfall through here and you want to show people? Are you just trying to show the possibilities of what you could do?
I mean, with that, we're trying to do all of those things. But what was really important is people come into this house and they go, wow, this is an amazing house. It might not be huge, but it is something that is really inspirational when you come in. So that was an important part of it. So having the triple height entrance hall isn't something you'd normally see in a developer home on a plot this size, but you come in and you go, wow. So that was part of it. But we are designing it ultimately, in 5 years' time, it will become a house. We want somebody to want to live in it. And designing it as a house that is open plan enough so people can walk around it and can move around it and things like that, all actually ties together into part of the brief. But primarily, we want people to look at it as, I want to live here, this is an amazing house. We don't want them to think, oh, this works very well as a museum.
Yeah.
What's the floor area and a few more of the details then about this?
Right, well, the floor area, it depends how you measure it, in simple terms. Particularly here on Graven Hill, there are restrictions for each plot on the gross internal area you can actually have. This plot had a restriction of 160 square metres, but the way they calculate it at Graven Hill doesn't include basements and it doesn't include void areas. So we've actually put in a full-size basement, which adds another 80 square metres, and we've also got an attic prime for conversion, which would further extend that. So the actual planning permission went in using the Graven Hill method at 150 square metres, but we've actually probably got about 230 or something like that.
I was going to say, it doesn't feel like 150.
Yeah.
And budget?
Budget was a difficult one to actually define because we were constructing it in a different way. To build, there is Build It's complete guide to the house that gives visitors details of the costs along the way and everything. If you look at the total sum that was spent to build a house like this, you're talking at about £2,000 a square metre roughly. It was actually slightly more than that, so the whole house would cost about £517,000 to build. But as the guide highlights, you could build basically the same size of house for substantially less if you're not specifying it to the same way. This house is a little bit like that BMW in a showroom. You go in expecting the car to be £30,000. How on earth can it be £42,000? Well, it's because it's got every bell and whistle. So we've got an amazing home cinema system with 7.2 Atmos sound from hidden speakers that are plastered over. That's obviously an expensive choice. The feature staircase are an expensive choice. There's a whole range of different things that people might or might not want to have on their spec. We've sort of put them all in because what we want people to do is to come in and say, okay, if I'm thinking about chunks of £5,000, where do I want to spend my money? And the whole point of an individual self-build home is that you have what's important to you. And we need to just help people make those trade-offs. And all self-builders in the real world have got a finite budget. They're going to have to make trade-offs. We want to help them make those decisions by actually looking at product and some of the options in the real world.
Just focusing on the designs for a moment, can you describe the house, how it came about and what it looks like if you were standing outside?
So the corner aspect is key to this house, as well as the outlook from within and outside of the property as well. So I wanted to create something that would be visually stunning, that would turn the corner as well. So with the footprint that you're given and the height restriction that you have, I started to play with form and looking at roof pitches. I always think that the flatter a roof pitch, it tends to easily quite slip into a 60-70 house when it's quite shallow. And unless you either go completely flat, completely modernist, I think that trying to get a steeper pitch onto a house, 38, 40, 45 degrees, is better. It gives you a better aesthetic. So I started to play around with models and breaking up this footprint into gable roof forms. Now, I looked at the original plot passport and thought, actually, if I straddle outside of it a little bit, I'm sure that that's going to be fine. So originally it was designed with 2 gables to face onto the front. It became 2 because to span from one end to the other end would have given me a shallow pitch. So I thought, well, actually, if I break it, that gives me quite a dramatic feature at the front. And I'd like to return an element of that gable around to the side as well. It went through its design evolution, including we can't build outside of that footprint, so that's why it's got a slight angle to it as well. But that's added interest, difficulty at building, I think, but interest in turning that gable through. So the original form of how I had it in my mind is still there. Moving beyond the form of it, it was then we had discussions with some of the suppliers, including the ICF supplier, and I wondered about using ICF to begin with because we have come across it before, but I always thought you have to stick to modular forms. It was quite inflexible, but chatting to Endura about it, they said, no, we can do frameless corners, we can do cantilevers, we can do all sorts of things. So I thought, okay, well, let's try and push the design and show these materials that we are going to use to their best rather than a simple little house. Let's try and push things. So you will see as you approach the house, we've got a balcony that projects over part of the car parking area. That is meant to hang off of a cantilevered ICF wall that flies out at the first floor level. There are meant to be frameless corners, so we have got windows that turn around that corner as well as taking those windows right the way up to the underside of the gables as well. So it's very impactful, I would say, in terms of its visual presence.
Opinder is talking about roof angles and things like that, and it can be slightly difficult to visualise that, but one of the restrictions on Graven Hill is an 8.1 metre ridge height, which if you're trying to have 2 floors and usable attic space is quite challenging. It's a bit tight.
Does everyone start at that point though, thinking that's got to be the height of our building?
Well, I think that is one of the most difficult restrictions that the planning here puts in place. To me, if they made it 8.5 metres, it would make a big difference to the houses and wouldn't make it look too voluminous and wouldn't make it look ugly or whatever. I just think that's a restriction that is unfortunate. Because the way a lot of the self-builders here have responded to that is to have some very shallow pitches. There's quite a lot of flat roofs, and there's quite a lot of what to me look quite Germanic sort of roof shapes out there, which personally I don't like. I much prefer a traditional roof angle, and actually our triple ridge roof that we've got is a very clever way of maximising the roof height for that attic room and having a very aesthetically pleasing roof on there that really makes the most of it. So I think that's one of the really clever parts of it, as well as these oblique angles on the building, which just really add interest to it. One of the interesting things too is it's very open plan downstairs, and the kitchen has got lots of hard surfaces, tiled floor, etc. And lots of people are saying it is going to be so noisy in there, there are no soft surfaces, but it's not. And one of the reasons that it's not is the oblique angle actually stops it being acoustically noisy. And I've since discovered that all sound studios and big cinemas aren't built as square boxes. They've all got walls just slightly out, and that really helps in terms of the noise bouncing around.
Does that present any difficulties construction-wise or detail-wise, or not so much?
Not so much. The ICF, I think, responded to it quite well. They seem to be able to fit it to whichever shape anyway, and it's quite simple when you looked at it on site, despite what it says in the technical manuals. The SIP roof, I think it became a challenge because not only did they have the XY dimensions to look at, the oblique angle, they did have to look at how that SIP roof would sit onto that gable, which is coming out at an angle.
On that choice of ICF, that's obviously one of the major decisions that self-builders make. So was that ever in question? What was the decision behind that? I know obviously you're going to get some really good energy efficiency out of that.
Yeah, that was a factor. It's very airtight. Acoustically, it performs very well, which for me is important as well. But one of the significant factors that sort of tipped us over the edge was we wanted to have a basement. Basements are not very common in the UK at all. In continental Europe, they're far more common. And particularly if you're looking at tight plots, then it is a fantastic opportunity to go downwards. And ICF is particularly well suited to actually doing basements, and is probably the most cost-effective way I've come across of actually creating a basement space. So that was the thing that sort of tipped us over the edge, as well as being it's a more modern method of construction, and we wanted to actually give that a go and experience what it was like pushing it to the limits with the oblique angles and all the other issues that went with it.
Let's have a wander through the house then, and since we're talking about downstairs, one thing I've noticed, that's where the plant room is. So what should we know about the plant room and the space that we need for that?
Well, our plant room, when you say downstairs, is actually in the basement, so right on, so underground. For me, if you're building a modern house to a high-performing house, then it is going to be essential to have mechanical ventilation, heat recovery system. The quality of the air is really important. If you just build to standard building regulations, you can end up with something that feels a bit like a Tupperware box, and it's just horrible. So I'm a great fan of MVHR systems, but they do take a lot of space. One of the great things about coming to the Build It house is you can actually see one in situ, get an idea about the amount of space it will take up, what the pipework looks like, start thinking about how you're going to run that ducting all the way around your house. All of those are really important practical things that you need to be thinking about. Lots of people don't plan enough space for a plant room, but the amount of space you need to devote to it is continually growing. So we've not only got our MVHR system down there, which has got a micro heat pump as part of it as our primary heat source, but it's also where the inverter for the solar panels goes, where we've got the battery storage, where we've got the control hub for the Nico smart home system that we've got within the house, and where we've got things like the amplifiers for the whole house sound system that's built through, and for the home cinema and things like that. So there's an awful lot of things that are all going back. The water softener, all of these things are going back into one room, and it takes a surprising amount of space. And certainly I've seen, when we've seen visitors at Build It Live that bring in their plans, one of the quite common things they've got is either no plant room or a tiny plant room. Yeah. And then they expect to put all these things in it, and that's a challenge.
I was about to say, you don't want to leave that till you've built the house and then think,
too late. And you need it ideally before you're into the technical design, because where we've got steels and you need to bring ductwork through or above or under or around it, you really need to know that so that you're not retrofitting things when it's on site as well.
And you've also you've got a beam block floor, for example, where you've chosen to leave the ductwork out in places. So was that slightly interesting that throughout the house you've got certain bits exposed where you might cover up and different ways of doing things?
So that's part of the journey through the house, is that you can see, oh, that's what that is. Because often you'll go into a finished house and you see these grills on the walls, but you don't know what it's connected to and where it's going. So it's part of it to demonstrate that. I think aesthetically in the basement it works quite well. It's nice to see it down there as well. So it's a little bit about the education of it, a little bit about you can understand what it is doing, so you have flow and returns, and part of the overall experience.
And the beam and block floor, which is on the ground floor, but then for the first floor, we could have, with ICF, had another beam and block floor. But we've actually got timber posi joists here, which obviously are fantastic for running that MVHR ducting through all your services. But one of the downsides of them can be noise transfer, and I mentioned before about acoustic performance. That's something that's really important to me. So we've actually got an acoustic floor on top of the posi joists. So there's actually some acoustic boards, acoustic insulation, and then a screeded floor, even on the first floor. So if you stamp your foot now, which will ruin your recording, you will find it feels like a really solid floor, and there isn't the noise transfer up-down that you would otherwise get with a typical timber floor.
That's quite interesting. I haven't heard of that solution before. And I know you mentioned that open plan was a big aspect of this. So as we move out of the basement, we started as low as we can go. So this is as you come into the house. Tell us about the open plan space and how you can change that and what you were trying to get out of it.
So we often try and do a visual connection from the front door so that you're looking through the house, often even towards the back garden as well. So the house does have a decent back garden to it as well. So coming in, as Calum said, we've got the triple height entrance hall area. The staircase is a feature, and then the eye is drawn through towards the back. And we've used a mixture of door types. You'll see to one side we have got pocket doors, so they slide into the walls. And then there's also a glass screen to give you flexibility to subdivide that open plan space if you needed to. So we always thought of this as a home. So whilst it is open to the public, the homeowners can benefit from these features as well.
Anything else that you can think of on that first floor?
Well, I think it is, to me, coming into the entrance hall and seeing a piece of sculpture. We've got this wonderful ash staircase that winds its way up, and to me that's a bit like putting the first bit of sculpture into your house, and is a fantastic sort of statement when you come in. So it's got features like that within it, but even little things like tucked away behind the loo downstairs, there's a curved wall that comes round into the kitchen, which again just adds that element of interest. Of course, it's more expensive and more difficult than doing a square wall, which anybody building to a price would specify. But having that curved wall with the floor-to-ceiling windows next to it just creates this amazingly light space that is just architecturally interesting and has a very nice sort of feel about it, which is quite difficult to actually express.
We've still got another 2 levels, haven't we? So we mentioned right at the top of the house, the attic is not going to be used straight away and could be transformed into usable space with permitted development. But what about the next floor up? What's on that level? And
so as you rise through the piece of sculpture, the staircase, we've used a glass balustrade to look down into this void as well. So that's quite nice, because there you're then starting to look at the outside. You can see the trees, you can see the brook, and across the road as well. And then that's then leading you through to what will become bedrooms. So they have got normal doors to them. Each room is different because of their different aspects that they've got and how they sit within the roof forms. So the room that we're in at the moment faces the front. It has the balcony, it's got a vaulted ceiling to it, so you get the interest in the height for what is a relatively small room. The master bedroom then is one of the main side gables, and that's capturing the view over the brook to the side with its ensuite facility as well. And then there is a normal bedroom in towards that back corner, and obviously a family bathroom at this level as well.
so what's been the biggest challenge then of this whole journey?
Well, I think it has been a challenge of coordinating different suppliers, different contractors to work together in the same way as lots of self-builders have if you're actually trying to project manage something yourself. Although we did have a main contractor who was helping to pull together the other partners we had working with us, it's always the people things that are difficult. It's the communication. It's the fact that everybody wants everything built to millimetre tolerances when somebody else is preparing something for them, but they don't want to be building it to the same tolerances when they're doing it for someone else. It's getting teams to work together in that kind of way. And, you know, one of the top tips I'd have for a self-builder from it is some of the most annoying errors we had along the way was where people hadn't actually used a tape measure correctly and hadn't quite got windows and doors in exactly the right place where we needed to have them. Now, as a self-builder and you've got your plans, you can very easily in the evening go round or at the weekend and just check some of these things. Is it exactly as it should be? Because what you're doing is building up problems for a later date if you don't nip things in the bud as soon as possible. So it was just like a typical self-build journey in so many ways. The problems are about people and communication and scheduling things and dealing with the weather and all of those little curveballs that come your way, and how you can actually try and continually pull it back to keeping it true to the vision of what you're trying to create originally in the plans, because it can be quite easy to deviate off slightly and end up with a house that doesn't quite look and doesn't quite perform in the way that you hoped it would.
And what have you learnt along the way on this project? I know obviously a lot of different houses and so forth going through the office, but are there any particular takeaways?
The ICF has been useful, particularly for basements. I think I'd probably use that as a solution on most of the basements that we do. You need to have it with the appropriate warranty and design covers now, but that comes with this ICF product that we've been using. I think the electronics are quite sophisticated in this house. So what we are doing is that we're inviting our clients to come and look at this house, and the providers are actually putting on demonstrations for them. So I think Total Home Environment are actually doing an event here next week, and they've got half a dozen of our clients that are coming to have a look at the MVHR and the heating system, because it is a little bit unique. It's not just an air source heat pump, it's not just an MVHR system, it's a hybrid, so it's quite unique. And when I'm asked about it, I can't just say it's magic. Come and have a look at what these people are saying, and we can see it in situ, you can hear it, what the noise levels are like. So it's great as an exemplar, and I'm learning more about it and feel confident that I can reassure our clients that actually I've got faith in this system, come and have a look at it and maybe use it in your project.
And how has this gone down in the office then? Is it a case of too many cooks, or did you say, right, we're only going to have one or two people involved in this project?
Yeah, everybody would like to have been really involved in it. It's been very much just myself and Chris who's been involved in it. I've been sort of a project director level, if you like, whereas Chris has been the sort of the project manager, going through the hard learning process in some ways that most self-builders have to go through. And learning the valuable lessons from it. But the team will love it. I mean, they feel rightly very proud of it. It's a house that when you see it, you just go, wow, that's amazing. And it really defines so much what the Build It brand is about. So seeing our 30th issue of the magazine, 30th birthday issue, with the Build It house on the front cover of it was a very proud moment for me and the rest of the team.
And how has it been for you? This is obviously something that ties straight back to the magazine. How have you felt that it's gone as a project for the magazine, really?
I've been delighted with it. You know, I'm not going to pretend that we finished on budget. We did need that contingency. You know, we were delayed, but not that severely, primarily because of the weather. You can't pour concrete into ICF when it's freezing. Now, they might do it in Canada, and people might tell you can do that, but if you try and do that in the UK, then your warranty provider won't give you the warranty on the house. So again, it's sort of, you know, the experience of actually doing something like that makes you realise what it is. So we've gained a huge amount from it. There's a vast amount of information about it on our website, and it is a cornerstone of our editorial sort of going forward, because we can always relate back to, well, when we had to make a decision on this is the route we chose, but in a different scenario we might do that. But we can use it as a reference point at all times.
And is there anything else about the house that perhaps I've skipped over or is worth underlining? Finally, anything you can think about?
I think it's useful to see what you can fit onto a fairly tight plot and see what is achievable. So it's not for the high end. This is attainable for everybody. So I think people should just come and have a look, be a bit more open-minded, and think, actually, I don't have to buy the noddy box house. I could actually think about doing my own.
Well, Calum and Opinder, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Head online to take a look at the show notes that accompany this session, houseplanninghelp.com/284, where you can review the main information again because we give you a summary. We've got some photos as well that will make sense of what you've been hearing about. Also explain how you can go and see the house yourself. Details in the show notes. If you've got a comment or you'd like to ask a question, you can do that within the show notes or also on social media. We'll give you all the links that you need. And to Build It magazine and to LAPD Architects, houseplanninghelp.com/284. So you've heard the podcast, maybe you've heard some others as well, and I thought finally today, I would ask a favour. If you enjoy what you hear on the podcast and to keep us motivated, to keep others finding us as well, maybe you could write us a short review on whatever platform you're listening to us on. Most people, I think, come through iTunes, but certainly not all of them. There are many different ways to do it. So if you can do that, it just helps boost us up in the listings and allows others to find and consume this content. And that would be greatly appreciated. Right, that's your lot for today. Thank you so much for being there. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.